Welcome to the podcast, everyone. My name is Daniel, as in Ghost Guide. So today on the podcast, I'm going to do an open talk about the most haunted theater that I've personally dealt with. So basically, this is a location that I physically went to. Since I'm in Southern Ontario, Canada, of course, it is in my hometown of Hamilton. In the Ghost Surreal segment, I'm going to be talking about some famous ghost photos. Well, actually, two really famous ones and one not so famous from a very haunted place just here in Hamilton as well. And for the strange news segment, I'm going to go to New York City. It's an article called Fright at the Museum. I think it's about MOMA, Museum of Modern Art. I think it is about that place. I like before, I don't pre-read these articles, so we will experience that together. Now, I don't have any major updates for you guys this week. The one thing is I am working on a new version of the Ghost Walks website. This will be number 3. I am personally not a fan of the current. I like the current design, but a lot of the behind-the-scenes workings of the website are very difficult to deal with. So I'm just going to clean that up. This is something I personally do on the side with website creation, and I'm just going to kind of work on that to clean it up. But as well, the reason I brought this up is I'm going to try and bring back the articles. I don't know if anybody has noticed or cares, but there was an article section that details some very haunted locations and just some stories from there. This has since disappeared. Since I changed hosting companies, I didn't bring it back. Partly my fault, partly the site wasn't really in a good state, so I just kind of let it go. So I'm going to try and bring that back, but I'm going to incorporate it into the main Ghost Walks website. So that way it's all like in one home. There's no separation, and we'll have some great ghost stories in there. Probably stuff that I can feature in future podcasts. But on that side as well, something that I've dabbled in the past, I'm going to be looking for guest writers. Anybody who wants to tell their ghost story, write an article on the website, which has a decent reach, and hopefully will get better as a reach. This way you can kind of get your writing out there, get your experiences out there, and eventually as well, take comments and stuff underneath. So this will be something that I do offer for guest writers. Let's call it a unpaid internship. It's just a way to flex your writing muscles. So expect that whenever. I'll probably work on it in the next couple months, hoping to have it up before the beginning of the 2021 main season of Ghost Walks, which, if you don't know, usually starts around April or May. As an aside to that, not sure exactly where we will be in the world in April and May. The pandemic. I have to say that I am quite lucky. I know a lot of other businesses that have been hit very hard by the pandemic, and I am lucky that I can actually offer something that we can have some type of tour to give to people, even though it's not all of our tours that we normally offer. Anything with an indoor element has been scrubbed from the itinerary. But if things haven't gotten more open by April or May, then you'll still see the same lineup. The Niagara on the Lake, downtown Hamilton, Hamilton's Dark History, potentially a couple others, including the Hermitage, will do. But so most of them will not come back at their full capacity until the pandemic is loosened, and very hopefully when it is done, which I'm sure I'm not the only one that is waiting with bated breath for that to occur. So that's all the updates that I have for you. Now, I mentioned about doing the open talk, and I kind of shot back and forth about what I was going to work on, feature this week, and the idea of a haunted theater this is something that kind of just popped into my head. I don't know if it's like telling me focus on this for whatever reason. But during the downtown Hamilton tour, when I lead it, I get to the Hamilton Place Theater, and I talked about how it's from the 1970s. So then people ask the question, well, if it's from the 1970s, how can it be haunted? Because if it's haunted locations, everybody has that stereotype in their mind that, it's a decaying house that many families have lived in over the years, and experiences and tragedies and et cetera, have created the energy of the place. And I talked a little bit about that with the Bellotti family last week's. All the shows are just blurring together. Look for it, about the idea of what makes a haunted house. So then when you think of a haunted house, and then you look at these theaters from the 1970s, or even another theater in Hamilton, Aquarius, from the 1980s, and they have ghost stories. Niagara on the Lake's Royal George Theater has ghost stories. I'm sure the Shaw Festival Theater, which is not very old, has ghost stories. And then people ask the question, well, it doesn't follow what you would think, right? It doesn't have enough experience and energy to have ghosts. But theaters are a different animal. So the idea is ghosts come from energy, and then energy builds up quicker when you have a lot of people in a space. So like houses, definitely my house, not a lot of people in here, but most houses, let's say you have at the most 3, 4, 5 people in a house. When a theater, you can have 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000, and not only are they there, but you're feeling the emotions, the show you're watching, the music you're listening to. You're feeling the emotions that come with that, and the actors and actresses on stage, all the energy they put out for the nervousness. Like, I don't know if anybody has any acting experience. If you're listening, you know that feeling. Any of my ghost guides in the ghost walks, you know the feeling of just before you go on, am I going to do a good job? Am I going to screw up my lines? Is the crowd going to like me? Or are they going to throw tomatoes? That nervousness, that anxiety you feel, and it leaves an impression. So if you do that in a space, a house not very often has that kind of feeling, unless it's a theater in a house, but in a theater it's different. So that emotional energy is at a heightened extreme inside of a theater, and that's my explanation and belief of why theaters are more haunted than your regular house. So getting back to that original point, I wanted to focus in on a theater this week. Now, this is Hamilton, Ontario, Canada's Tivoli Theatre. If anybody's local or is familiar with the city, it would have been on James Street North. And currently it's an open space, like a tooth missing in a line of buildings. And in the back, there's this derelict structure that has some graffiti on the front, controlled graffiti. It was like an art thing. James Street North is an art district in Hamilton. And inside that building is a crumbling auditorium. So that's where the Tivoli used to be located. Now, the reason it's not there anymore, this was in 2004. And I remember this because the HH shop was on James Street South. And we were hearing about what they were going to do with the Tivoli, that there was the plan to demolish it after a piece of the structure had fallen in on itself. So these buildings, if they're not kept up constantly, some of them were built cheaply. I don't know if that's the case with the Tivoli building. Some people might yell at me for that one. But part of the structure fell in. Now, the thing was, it was about halfway down behind the original historic portion of the Tivoli, where it collapsed in on the second level, just before the auditorium. So I personally don't agree with their rush to tear down the front facade, because that front facade was extremely unique. If you haven't seen a picture, look it up. Tivoli Theatre, Hamilton. Extremely unique, extremely historic, and significant to Canada in that it is believed the first talkie movie was played inside the Tivoli. Talkie is when they went away from the silent film genre, and they actually had physical voice actors behind the screen that would speak along with the lines, so it was almost like you're watching a movie with the voices. It was huge at the time. Now sounds silly, but it was huge at the time. So it was significant. It was beautiful. And when a piece fell in, they rushed. They rushed down, and they tore the front facade down, and they just left the back auditorium to hopefully do something with it. So how it used to look and what we used to have there led up to about 2004 when we heard about that, and then they rushed it. So I actually have a brick in my office here. It's it was up on my cabinets. I have no idea where it is. I'm gonna go find it eventually. But it was a brick when we went down there to see what was going on, and saw them just demolishing the front. This was a few days after the collapse piece. One of the workers was nice enough to hand over a brick. So I actually do have one of the original bricks from the Tivoli Theater, the front facade. So you had a location that not only was a theater, but it was a historic theater. I'm not talking historic in the sense that, 1920s, starting with the vaudeville era, when most historic theaters began, 1920s, 1930s. I'm talking about a structure that dates back to the 1800s. It wasn't a theater, though. It was a carriage factory. So it was a carriage factory. It had that energy. It then was bought and converted into, I believe it was called the Princess Theater at the time, by a fellow named Ambrose Small. Now, if you want an interesting read, I'm not going to get too far into detail about it. Ambrose Small owned many theaters, including a couple in Toronto, the one in London, the London Grand, which may be one of the few that still exist today. And he is one of the most infamous disappearances in Canadian history. He was probably murdered, and many people think it was his assistant, John Doughty, that did it. But he disappears. We don't know what happened to his body. He never came back. So he was the one who kind of converted it to a theater, vaudeville stage, and later becomes a movie theater. So at one point they turn it from the 200-seat vaudeville, which was just the front building, and then they added the 2,000-seat auditorium in the back for a movie theater. It was a movie theater for most of its life, and then after that converted back to live performances when it was purchased by Sam the Record Man, Sam Snyderman. If any Americans are listening, look it up. He was Sam the Record Man was a huge record store, later cassette, later CDs, and then once iPods took over, later nothing. It's not in business anymore, and they opened a Sam right beside it. Didn't really work out like they hoped, and for that reason, I think that was the main reason why they didn't sink money into it to fix it up. So the Tivoli started to crumble. Now, eventually, that would go up to 2014. The piece has fallen out. They come in rush and they tear down the front building, leaving an open space and the auditorium behind it. Now, this place is close to my heart, not only because it is uniquely haunted for a theater, because of its history, but because of the fact that the manager, when it was coming towards the end, a great guy named Lorne Lieberman, he allowed us to go in there and do a couple of special ghost walks, because we featured the Tivoli originally, and after the building fell down, we didn't bother walking. It wasn't worth the extra walk down James Street. But we used to feature it, and he knew this. We would stand under the marquee and tell some of the stories of the building, Ambrose Small and the ghost stories I'm about to share with you. And he offered to allow the tour to come in. Now, this was when Ghost Guy James was leading the downtown Hamilton tours. This is towards the beginning. And I still remember it. I was on that tour. Of course, I wasn't going to miss it. And we were inside the auditorium. So people walk through the front lobby, into the auditorium, and our group could sit in the seats, and Ghost Guy James could go up on stage and tell the ghost stories from there. And I remember the one time close to Halloween that Lauren Lieber and I actually set something up. He had some of the actors come in, and I think it was himself as well, and they dressed in robes. It was so cool. I think they were holding candles too. I can't remember, but they were in robes with the hoods covering their faces, and they were lined up the aisles. So when people came in, I think we were having multiple tours that night, they would come in and they would have to pass by these makeshift druids, and not sure if they were going to do anything. Of course they didn't. That's not how we roll. But then they could sit down and hear the ghost stories. So a personal love for this place. We had some great experiences with the management, and one of the reasons why we were focusing on it, of course, the history with Ambrose Small being connected to it, but as well, we would be told of these amazing ghost stories that happened inside the building. And I got a couple I'm going to share with you here that we were personally connected to. And the first one had to do with a vent. So if you look at the picture, you're probably asking, how do I look at the picture? Go to the Ghost Guy Daniel Facebook page. I actually don't even think you need to be on Facebook. I think you can visit it from the outside and still see this. So facebook.com/DanielsAGhost, or just search Ghost Guy Daniel on Facebook. And scroll down December 26th, that post. I actually have a picture of the way the auditorium looked from the outside today. And then it's an older photo that I had, but it's a picture of the stage. And it's the crumbling auditorium from the inside. And in the picture, there's I forget the statue on the left, but the one on the right is of Caesar. And underneath it, you can't really make it out. There's the front, and then right under the statue behind, there's this block here. I think it's the stairs. There's a vent. So the experience was that people would hear voices coming from this vent under the Caesar statue. And a couple of them said that when they heard it, they couldn't make out what it was being said, but they did say it was like high-pitched. It sounded like a child. So Lorne Lieberman, always the major believer in the paranormal, at one point he just couldn't take it. He had to figure this out. And he goes down to the vent and opens it up and climbs inside. Now, I don't know what kind of dust balls filled with what kind of diseases were inside that vent, but look at this. I mean, he just dove right in for the sake of the paranormal. I mean, that's any paranormal investigator listening, that is something to strive for. So you risk life or limb to prove ghosts are real. So he goes inside. I don't know what he was thinking to expect, that maybe there would be a child sitting in there rocking back and forth and would disappear. I don't know. But he did find something very interesting. Now, I'll come back to that. So we did an investigation inside the theater. It was myself, my partner at the time with HH, and our two psychics, Kate and Michelle. And we were doing investigation. The psychics always go in cold, meaning they don't have any information. They could look up the history. I trusted Kate and Michelle very much. We mentioned not even to look up the history, and I'm sure they didn't. But this isn't something that would come from the history anyway. So they knew nothing. And we're walking through the main structure. We go into the auditorium, and Michelle beelines it. She takes off towards the front to the stage and to the Caesar statue, and talks about the spirit of a little boy. Now, I can't remember for the life of me specifically who the little boy was, or just that. I don't even know if she had that information, but she picked up on it right away. She knew that the energy was in there, and said, yeah, there was a child inside this space. So Lorne Lieberman basically confirmed this, not just from the voices, but from when he crawled into the vent and he found an old report card Now, there's a elementary school in Hamilton called Ryerson. I don't know if it's still in operation, but the card was from the original Ryerson school, and it was very faded. I don't think you can make out any names or anything, but you would think that was the connection, right? I don't know. I don't know if maybe it was a kid of one of the actors or a kid of one of the managers for the stage or whatever, but it could have been a cool hiding place before all the disease dust. Maybe they kept it clean back then. I don't know. But it would have been a good hiding place to get away from everything. So all of that kind of ties in nicely. That's why I love that, is when you have a ghost story, an experience, and then you can connect it with a real life aspect, with something material, such as the report card, to show you that this could have been a space where a child was hanging out, and that kind of proves the ghost story to be real. Now, the other one I wanted to share with you has to do with the infamous guard dog at the Tivoli. I don't even think a lot of people knew about this, but when Lord Lieber was in there, downtown Hamilton wasn't as nice as it is today. And I can already hear you saying it's not nice even now. But I'm telling you, take my word for it, it is leagues nicer than it used to be when we were doing the tours in 2006 and eventually put the tours on hiatus for 2 seasons because we couldn't guarantee people's safety anymore. That was the worst of downtown Hamilton. Now it's not the greatest. It's not perfect. I wouldn't expect it to be. It's not like you're walking through downtown Burlington or something. It's got character, and like you would see in parts of Toronto. There's that element to it. But I don't feel in danger down there as I used to. So back in those days, when it was at its worst, Lorne had a problem that sometimes you would have characters coming up to the front. Maybe I'm sure he's had a couple broken windows, and it would set the alarm off, like for real, not the times that the alarms went off by themselves, which is another story for another time. So he had this notorious guard dog. It was a Rottweiler, and the dog's name was Nobby. Now, Nobby was short for something, and this is the best part. Nobby was short for Norbert T. Rottweiler. So only his friends could call him Nobby, and I was told I never actually got to meet him, but that if you weren't his friend, then you didn't dare call him Nobby. He was an imposing character, I'm told, as many Rottweilers are. But I'm sure deep down, very lovable. So what he was trained to do is if anybody got close to the front window under the facade, and I don't know if you know, but dogs can tell if somebody has ill intent. They can maybe look on their face or how they're approaching or their body language, but dogs know when it's not right, and then they'll go into action. So the guard dog Nobby, he would run up to the window and scare them away. I'm sure it was very effective. So what Lorne did was he would so in the front part, before you went into the lobby, there was this open space, the foyer, and I believe it was on the left, there was an office door. So inside there, that was Lorne's main office where he did his work. So what he would do is he would leave the foyer open, and I believe he opened the door into the lobby, but not the auditorium. And so the lobby and the foyer would be open for the dog to wander. I'm sure he had a little bed in there somewhere too. So he could watch the front and make sure nobody came in from the sides. I assume that was the reasoning. That's just my guess. But the office door was locked and the auditorium was locked. So keep that in mind. So Lorne would have the Nobby in there on many nights, or Mr. Rottweiler as I would call him because I never met him. He would have him in there on many nights, and there was one day that he comes in the next morning, and Mr. Rottweiler is missing. So Lorne looks everywhere. He even went into the auditorium. He's looking everywhere, can't find him. He's like, "Oh, I hope he didn't get out," but he wouldn't think that the dog would run away. So as he's just at his wit's end, he's standing in the foyer, and what does he hear? But from the main office, his office, some whimpering. So he goes to the office door. He tries the handle. It's locked. So he has to unlock the office, open it up, and who walks out looking very upset? Nobby. So this is very confusing, to say the least. Because remember what I said. The office is locked every night. Nobby is only given access to the foyer and the lobby. He couldn't. He doesn't have a key. He doesn't have a key to get in. So for Lauren to come in and find him locked in the office is very strange. So he leaves it alone. Doesn't really go into it too much. And a couple nights later, it happens again. Comes in and Nobby's in the office. So he's asking around. He's trying to figure out what's going on. He doesn't really know what to think. So one day it just kind of hits him. You can imagine the frustration you're feeling because you don't want your dog to be locked in the office like that. You want him to be able to do his job. And this was witnessed by some of the actors, which included our former ghost guy, James, who I mentioned earlier. And Lauren just telling Nobby in front of the door, show me what you're doing. And I am told this. It seems over the top to me, but I have no reason to disbelieve it. But that Nobby did actually do what he was doing. It wasn't him, but that in front of multiple witnesses, he went up to the door, which opened. He went inside, and I'm told that it slammed behind him and locked. I don't know if you're going to believe that. I do believe it, just from the sense that it came from very reputable sources for me. But again, you're hearing it, a friend of a friend situation. I don't expect you to believe it. But the door was opening and locking behind Nobby. And after Lauren witnessed that, I'm told that it wasn't a problem again. Of course, it wouldn't be any problem needed after 2004. So, in those senses, that the Tivoli, in my mind, is probably one of the most haunted theaters around. In my personal experience, definitely the most haunted theater I've ever dealt with, because of that unique history that is not the same for other theaters, even the historic ones, that it actually had a use before that. Now, if you know of another one that is better, you want to try and one-up me, I'm cool with that. I love hearing these stories. I want to know. You can message me through Facebook, Ghost Guide Daniel, or shoot me an email at ggdaniel@ghostwalks.com. Okay, I'm going to pause for a little bit just so that you guys can kind of sense what's around you. If you haven't listened to the podcast before, this is when you can use any type of ghost tools if you have an EMF. If you don't, or divining rods, pendulums. If you don't, you can use a camera, recording device. Because we're talking about ghosts, in my experience, it does stir stuff up. So I'm going to pause for a few seconds. Feel free to pause the podcast to go longer, and we'll see if anything happens. Anything? You know what I'd like to think? I'd like to think that if I talk about a certain type of ghost, that I call them on. Of course, I don't want them coming to my place, so my goal is to send them to your place. I don't know if you like that or not. If you do, you're welcome. If you don't, you're also welcome. It's probably not how it works, though, so try not to freak out. So for Ghosts Are Real, I'm going to go into one of my personal favorites. These are ghost photos. Now, there's two things that kind of freak me out. If there's anything that freaks me out, these are the two main things that kind of freak me out. The top one, number one, 100% with a bullet, is anything to do with phones. Now, if I hear stories, I've had experiences like stuff has happened at my tours where the phones will act weird or something will occur. I can tell that story another time, but so anything with phones freaks me out. and in horror movies too. And the other one is photos. I've seen some amazing photos over the years. I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And of course, the majority, unfortunately, is an orb photo. Personally, that is my belief. Whatever you believe in orbs is up to you. I respect that. But with my approach to it, orb photos, there's just too much natural phenomenon. So with the natural phenomenon, you get the idea that something has occurred when it hasn't. So if there's like moisture, if there's dust, if there's whatever. So that's why I push it aside with orb photos. But then sometimes you get these photos where it is just undeniably that there is something there. Now, I talked about it in last week's Gossipy Gossip episode about a ghost photo that was not. And that one was quite obviously not. If you want to see that, you can go to the Ghost Guy Daniel page. It is December 30th post. Please head there. I didn't get much traction on that one. December 30th post, like that is an obvious fake. But there's other ones that have these elements to them that make them more real. And these ones that I'm going to talk about today, for me, are some very legitimate ones. Now, there's other ones out there, but these are the ones I'm going to focus on because of their backstories and because of my own personal experience with it, and just in the sense of somebody who has had a lot of experience in seeing these photos, what elements that I would attribute to it when I see it from my own experience of what would make it more legit. That's where it's coming from right now. So I have 3 for you here. I'll start with the not so famous one and then go into the famous ones. Not so famous one is from the Hermitage. If you haven't heard me talk about it before, basically the Hermitage is one of our Ghost Walk locations. It's technically Hamilton. It's a small town called Ancaster. It's part of Hamilton. Very historic place. Ruins of an 1850s mansion in the middle of the forest. And this was 2-3 years ago that somebody sent me a photo from the Hermitage. I just want it in front of me here. Hermitage. Okay, so it sent me a photo. They said it was from 1977. This was from Stephen S. I won't give away his last name, but from 1977, and it's quite interesting. You can see it at Ghost Guy Daniel. It is January 3rd's post. And on the right-hand side in the trees, you can see what looks like a shadow. Now, this is interesting for a couple reasons. First off, that is kind of an active spot when you go to the right of the ruins. Not so much today, but back in those days, it had this certain energy about it. And that space created a lot of experiences for people. I'll get into that in a second. And the second reason why it's important is because the way it looks, shadows are quite common for this location. And now I am talking this from experience. I saw 2 shadows there walking in the field, and they disappeared into the woods. So for me personally, I do know that there's something to the shadow experience at the Hermitage ruins. So you have this shadow. That's the picture. I invite you to go look at it on the Ghost Guy Daniel Facebook page. So the Hermitage itself was a house from the 1850s built by the Leith family. And then over the years, they lived there until the early 1900s. George Leith's youngest daughter, Alma, then takes it over. She lives there. She actually was in the house when the fire occurred that turned it into ruins. And then she stayed there even after that, first in a tent out front and then in a little wooden structure on the inside. And that's, eventually where she died. I think it was around the 1940s. So she was dedicated to this location. So there's her energy, and then over the years being a remote location, people coming out to experience the ghosts and tell ghost stories, created an energy about it. And that's one of the reasons why we focus on it for a ghost tour. Now, that location on the side where the shadow is being seen, as I mentioned, was quite active. And the 2 things were either seeing lights or hearing voices. Now, the seeing lights was shared to us by one of our longtime helpers, close friend Gary, and he was one of the first ones to experience this. But it's funny, you get that first initial pioneer, and then over the years, people who are not connected to him, haven't heard him speak about it. Anybody who's on the inside knows that there's a joke there. He wouldn't speak about it to anybody because of what he's doing at the ghost walks those nights. But he saw the lights in the field, and then other people have confirmed that experience by also seeing lights. It's kind of like in the distance in the woods. And because you're in the middle of the Dundas Valley forest at night, you can make out the lights quite easily. So he'd see them, and then on a couple occasions, people have talked about hearing voices. Now, one of the stories we feature on the tour has a young lady who first felt anxiety and dread when she went up to the ruins. And then when she went around the side, we used to have to go around it before you could go through it. It used to be fenced off. That she heard voices from the trees. Now, she said she couldn't make out what they were saying. They were kind of muffled, and she looked at everybody else in the group, and they weren't hearing it. So she didn't say anything out loud, and she only told us afterwards. So you have the lights, you have the voices, which other people have confirmed as well. So it creates a focal point at the side of the rooms. Now, me personally, I don't think that's the most energetic area. But then again, when you have a photo like this taken and you're just an off chance that the energy has gathered at the moment that you've taken the shot, then it makes sense that something would appear. And it's from the front, not from the back. My personal experience is that most of the energy seems to be from the back, especially back towards the laundry house, which I've had experiences in the middle of the field where the house and structures used to go. Of course, that would be a focal point. So go out, have a look at the photo. Tell me what you think. So that was the not so famous one. The couple of famous ones I want to bring up. The one is on the page right now. The Freddie Jackson photo. It's on the Ghost Guy Daniel Facebook page. And then the other one, I believe, posts tonight. I'm just going to check that, make sure. There's Freddie Jackson and schedule. Yeah, so the other one posts actually tomorrow night. Whoopsie. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and reschedule that for tonight. Let's reschedule. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. I'm looking out for you guys. I hope you appreciate it. Okay, so I'll start with the Freddie Jackson ones. That's the ones up. You can look up these ones yourself, too. I'll give the name of it, but Freddie Jackson, I have a great photo on the page here that just kind of shows it in perfect sense. It's got the zoomed out and the zoomed in. So the story is this airplane mechanic in the year 1919, he was working on a plane, and towards the front, he's near the propeller. Of course, the plane's not firing up, but you kind of expect what's about to happen next, and it's exactly what it is. Very tragic. The propeller starts up, kills him instantly. So you have a couple of factors that play into this ghost photos that give it legitimacy. Of course, the third factor I'm not mentioning is the legitimacy of the actual photo. It is a creepy looking thing. I mean, you just got this one of the soldiers' faces, and it's almost like somebody is standing directly behind him, just kind of peeking out, and you can see the face very clearly. So you have that element, but then as well, the two ones leading up to it. So first off, he was killed instantly, which means in a lot of cases that he is not going to know that he is dead. Now, this, of course, is just an assumption. They call it the unknown for a reason. I probably won't know this until the day I die, but I would just assume, right? I mean, if you're killed instantly, then you wouldn't know, right? You would go on into the spirit realm and not realize what's going on. I don't think you would play out your life. I mean, you would be confused. You wouldn't know where you were, but maybe the lack of a physical brain would create confusion. But I'm going on a tangent here. But the idea is that, if he was killed instantly and didn't know he was dead, that's one element. But the other element is that his energy was set in motion towards this event of taking the photo with his fellow soldiers, this military photo that you'll see on the page there. So those two factors, that he probably doesn't know he's dead and that he knows he is heading to this photo, set his energy in motion to show up. And that's what you see in the photo, is that this guy that the other soldiers have confirmed looks like Freddie Jackson, that he has shown up to the photo. Now, whether you believe that, and I know other skeptics have said about this, and I want to present kind of a skeptic point of view, which in ways is very easy for me, because I like to approach it from a skeptical view. I don't like to believe everything I hear. That a skeptic point of view would say, okay, if you zoom in on the photo, which I will do in a second here, if you zoom in on the photo, that you can actually, that the soldier in the front, that the image that's appearing behind him looks like him. Sorry, that was my phone. That the image is appearing behind him looks like him, that it could just be some kind of weird exposure that, old photos did all the time. So if a skeptic point of view, you can say that, but then I'm looking at it, and what I see, like, you can see the face, but then above, you can almost see like a forehead. And with the soldier standing in front, he's wearing a hat. And I think that's a saving grace here, if you want to believe in this photo, is that the forehead is showing, but on the actual person, there's no forehead. So for me, and I don't think that's been manipulated, for me, I would say, okay, there's no hat. It can't be your odd exposure that's occurring here. So Freddie Jackson is one of my favorites. If out of all ghost photos, I do kind of give a lot of legitimacy to this one because of what I just told you there. So the other one is, the other famous one is a place called Bachelor's Grove. Now, if you want to look it up and not have to wait for my post to go tonight, just look up Madonna of Bachelor's Grove. Now, this is a cemetery or a burial ground that's located just out of the side of the city of Chicago. And as ghost photos go, this one is probably the closest of the famous ghost photos to us personally. I'm talking about world famous. So Bachelor's Grove is a burial ground. Now, if you've listened to my shows before, you've been on the tours, you might have heard, especially the Ruthven tour, you might have heard us talk about how we don't believe cemeteries are haunted. Unless there's extenuating circumstances, most cemeteries don't have ghosts. And our reasoning, a lot of people agree with this idea, is that there's no life energy there. People didn't live in cemeteries, and by the time that their bodies get to these burial grounds, there's nothing left. There's no energy there. Now, of course, you have the sadness from the family, and you have the mixture of our general fear of death. So if you combine those two things, it makes cemeteries creepy, but I think part of the creepiness is the fact that it is void of any feeling whatsoever. So if you are scared of death, you will fear a cemetery. But if you're not scared of death, you will kind of see it as a tranquil place because there's no emotional energy that's imprinted on the space. But whether you see it from point A or point B, in the end, it doesn't seem like a cemetery would be haunted to me. And in my experience, that has been the case. Now, of course, there are your extenuating circumstances. I'll give you one example, is in the city of Niagara Falls. On the Canadian side, there's a cemetery called Drummond Hill. And this is on Lundy's Lane. Now, Lundy's Lane is aptly named because the Battle of Lundy's Lane from the War of 1812 occurred on that spot. And that spot included the space where Drummond Hill Cemetery is now standing today. So when you have that tragic energy that occurred in one of the most violent battles in the only war fought on Canadian soil, then of course you're going to have energy left over from it. And there are experiences in Drummond Hill Cemetery. So then you always got to ask the question, well, if a cemetery is haunted like Bachelor's Grove, which the photo hopefully proves, then where is that energy coming from? So then the next thing you have to do is look into the history of the location. This is very important in the paranormal investigation game. So when you look at the history, you got to hope something stands out. And with Bachelor's Grove, it stands out in a really good way. So Chicago is known for deep dish pizza, but it is also known for something else. During the Prohibition days, one of the most famous bootleggers / mobsters in world history. Everybody knows this fellow's name, Al Capone. Now he ran out of Chicago, and as was proven here in Hamilton, which is kind of like the Chicago of the North when it came to the mob from Prohibition on, that you needed a location for disposal. I'm going to explain what that means. So disposal is the people who are rats, stoolies, the ones that go against your own people, the ones that turn on the mob, or the ones that just don't do their job very well. You gotta kind of dispose of them, right? Anybody seen The Godfather, you know what I mean. So in Hamilton, the area was known as Mount Albion, and in Chicago, the area was known as, and I'm not even going to try to say the name of the town, but it is the town where Bachelor's Grove is located. So Bachelor's Grove was a dumping ground for the mob. Now, I don't know the reason why. It was remote. They could have dumped them anywhere in the forest there. There's a lot of forests. But I think it was because Bachelor's Grove was already a cemetery, right? That would be the reason why they would focus on it, because there's already dead people in the ground, so what does it matter if you add a few more? I don't know if it's superstition or the fact that they might think that the cops would be hesitant to dig up graves, like actual official graves, to look for the bodies. Whatever it is, they chose that spot. So there you have an extenuating circumstance that I know they brought the bodies out there. Is also very possible that they also committed the deeds, like killed the people out there as well before burying them. So that would be an extenuating circumstance. So the photo, which I believe is from the 1980s. So just do a quick search, Madonna of Bachelor's Grove in Google. Okay. Yeah, so 1991. I'm sorry, 1991. A photographer named Judy Huff Feltz. I believe she was a paranormal investigator. Correct me if I am wrong. So 1991, she was at Bachelor's Grove doing an investigation and took a photo of the entire burial ground and noticed something in the distance. Now, I will describe the photo here. Again, it'll be on the Ghost Guy Daniel page. So in the distance, just beyond a tree, there's a figure sitting on a gravestone. Now, in some of these ghost photos, you can question what you're looking at. In the Freddie Jackson one, you can't. And in this one, you cannot. 100% cannot. This is a woman sitting on a gravestone. Now, so it was said that it was a shot of the whole burial ground, and then they zoomed in just beyond the tree for this woman. And who she is, what she's doing there, I don't think anybody really knows. I don't think she would have been a victim of the mob. I don't think they ever, I would actually fathom that they never killed women, innocent women especially. Some circumstances they might if the woman was involved for some reason, although I think that was more in Hamilton than in Chicago. But here we have a woman sitting on a gravestone, so why would she be there? I would question that. I don't know. Connected to some of the original graves, maybe. Connected to maybe her husband was one of the victims of Al Capone. I don't know. But she's there. So you take a look at the photo, there is no questioning that is a woman sitting on a gravestone. Now, I might question why it's in black and white, and I might also question the pixelation of it. Even though it is from 1991, which you wouldn't think photos are as great. I'm pretty sure this was taken professionally, like with a decent camera. So the pixelation seems to be a little bit too much. The fact that it's black and white makes me question, because it wouldn't be black and white photos in the 90s. And that's why I always ask the question. I see some of these ghost photos, the blurrier they are, the less validity I give to them. So that would be where I do the question. But the supporting evidence for this ghost photo is the location. The fact that it's so uniquely tragic that the location was an 1800s pioneer cemetery or burial ground, and then of course a dumping ground for the mob, which in Chicago was rampantly out of control. And then you also come back to today and you have multiple experiences at that location, like seeing full-fledged apparitions, and there's a lake nearby. Much of the stuff around the lake, some of the farms that were in the area, they say there's energy from that. So all of that is supporting, and the fact that I am told that analysis has been done on this photo and that nothing odd was found about it. So the supporting elements in my mind do overtake the non-supporting elements. So for that reason, I am a full believer and do believe this is something real. You might disagree, but there's no disagreeing that it is one of the most known ghost photos in the entire world, and one of the very few famous ghost photos to come from North America. I believe there's another one that happened down in Tombstone, Arizona, but this one being up in Chicago, it's closer to myself, so near and dear to my own heart. So check them out. Check out the photos. The last one's going to go up tonight at 7:05 p.m. on Ghost Guy Daniel Facebook page. And if you have any comments or anything, feel free to shoot me a message. So we're getting towards the end of the podcast. I am still going to do the Fright at the museum, but let's do a very quick pause for you to sense stuff, and I'll be right back. Take any photos? That's exactly what I would have done in that moment. Just take a bunch of photos of everything around me and see what comes through. But then again, maybe you don't. Maybe the last thing you want is to realize there's some creepy little kid ghost or some weirdo with a big mustache standing behind you, watching you listen to this podcast right now. Okay, I got the article up here. So what we have is Fright at the Museum. Sorry, I'm just looking for an author. So it's on the observer.com, and the author is not on the page. That is weird. Okay, I'm sorry I don't have the author, but just look up the Fright at the Museum title on the observer.com. So there's a photo here from the museum, I assume, and it has the caption, "Who are you going to call ghost doctors?" Photo is by Jordan Taylor. There may be something strange in the Museum Mile neighborhood, as the transom discovered last Friday night. Thankfully, we have already called the ghost doctors. Oh my goodness, there's a link. Hold on a second, ghostdoctors.com. Don't go to it yet. I'm just going to check for you. There might be a virus or something. It's still up. Okay, guys. Okay, you need to. Ghostdoctors.com. Oh, there's a cute little graphic of a ghost doctor. This is awesome. Okay, it looks like they're based out of Virginia. I guess near Washington. So Virginia near Washington. Yeah, look it up. Ghostdoctors.com. Thankfully, we had already called the ghost doctors Pete and Stu Candle, and the brothers agreed to take us on a tour of one of their favorite haunts, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it's MOMA. When asked if a human needs to have died in the museum for energies, as they call them, to be roaming the halls, Dr. Stu answered in the negative. I always say that ghosts just like to have fun, he said, leading us into the Egyptian art wing. In other words, if a spirit enjoyed art museums during her time in the physical world, then she may fancy a stroll through the Met after her afterlife. In her afterlife. So yeah, actually, that's an interesting point. So I personally, the ghost could be connected to the building, could be connected to the artifact, energies that have glommed onto it for whatever reason, or just residual energy that's been left over from the experience of that material thing. Continuing on. The ghost doctors told us to trust our senses when searching for spirits. You pick up flowery, perfumey smells, Dr. Pete said. Some also notice drops in the air temperature, and women are much more receptive. Now, that's an interesting note. Now, in general, in my experience, this is Daniel talking, that I do believe women are more sensitive to things in the paranormal, that in general, they are more spiritual in the world we live in. That, of course, is changing with mindfulness and meditation and everything. It's not just women that are doing that. And I think that will change as we go down the road. But right now, as it stands, women are definitely more spiritual. So I can agree with that they would be more receptive. But just in case the transom's womanly wiles wouldn't be enough to lure in an energy, the brothers had also packed a laboratory of ghost hunting equipment in a black doctor's bag. Well, that makes sense. And they're doctors, too. I don't know what transom is. No, I'm looking at a transverse piece of a structure. Cross piece, I don't know. Just ignore that. That's what I'm going to do. So they have ghost hunting equipment in a black doctor's bag. Now, there was an ambient thermometer to measure temperature drops, a Geiger counter and dowsing rods to pick up radiation, a laser grid to detect ghostly movements, and an electromagnetic field meter, or EMF. Dr. Sue says a change in EMF means something's going on. This is true. In my experience, the EMF, that if a ghostly energy passes through an area, that an EMF will spike. As I shared with the experience from last week's episode at the Hermitage off the window there. Continuing on, we swept the Egyptian artifacts gallery looking for sudden sparks on our EMF meter. Though our heart leapt as we detected a few preliminary spikes, the doctors attributed that to the museum's electrical cables. Yeah, electrical cables and water pipes tend to cause them to go off. Electrical cables, the readings became measurably strong when we held the meters directly above the floor, so we moved on. In the European sculpture and decorative arts wings, we spotted an EMF spike in an ornate room containing Louis the XV's oak writing table. Somebody knows Roman numerals. Dr. Peter produced his EVP recorder. So an EVP recorder, they make it sound so technical here, is basically just a recorder. If you have a digital recorder, or in my day it was a microcassette recorder, you can get EVPs, which is ghost voices that are picked up by the microphone. So he produced his super awesome EVP recorder in hopes of communicating with the energy. Quote, "If anybody's here, we'd love to speak with you." Very common. Dr. Pete said aloud. As the recorder ran, we each asked questions. Are you a man? Did you work here? When did you exist in the physical world? That's a good one. Dr. Pete held the device to his ear and played back the recordings. He looked serious. Quote, "I don't want to say for sure that it's something, but..." And then he ran the recording for us as our skepticism suffered a scared. We couldn't deny the indecipherable, ghostly hiss that came in responding to our question. The ghost doctors said they'd have to further analyze the recording on their home software. That's always a good thing to do. that you can increase the volume and listen very closely, and even put out all the background sound if you use a good sound editor. Sorry, as a side note, that reminds me, one of the articles that I just recently put back up is on the Merritt House in St. Catharines. Sorry, I want to make sure I give you the right link here. Shoot. No, okay, I got the wrong link. Hold on, articles. Okay, yeah, so if you go to ghostwalks.com, there's no link to it. I haven't gotten that far yet. But I just put it back up so that it eventually gets picked up by Google. But go to ghostwalks.com/articles/Merritt-house. And Merritt is spelled MERRITT. And at the bottom of that article, I actually have the sound recording here. It is from 97.7 Hits FM, which is the radio station that broadcasts out of there. Play the sound and you will hear a certain type of almost demonic hiss or strange noise that comes through to show you the kind of stuff that an EVP can capture. So check that out. I'll actually post a link on the Ghost Guy Daniel page for tomorrow. Okay, where did I leave off? Ghost doctors said they'd have to further analyze the recording. Dr. Stu decided it was time to break out the dowsing rods, 2 skinny metal rods, one for each hand, that supposedly detect currents of radiation. That is not true in my experience, that they detect radiation, although I've never walked through a radiation field. Divining rods historically would detect disturbances and energies around you. So if you walk through an external energy, they'd react to that. And that comes from their history of they were originally used to find water sources to dig wells. I don't know about radiation. But they say if we felt a magnetic pull in a certain direction, we were to follow it. Almost instantly, the rod in our right hand jerked to the right. We followed the metal tool towards a set of intricate gliding doors. There the rod stayed firmly parallel, so it was almost like it was pointing them in the right direction, which I'm told they do that as well, because it's pushing you, like it's the energy is attracting it. Quote, "If you'd like to communicate with us, please cross the rods," Dr. Stu commanded. After about 30 seconds, our rods crossed. Dr. Stu asked the energy to uncross the rods. The rods uncrossed. And he asked the energy to cross the rods if it was female. The rods crossed. Now, 2 days later, we got a phone call from the good doctors. So the investigation is over. That was a very, very rough cut right there. So the investigation is over. It seems that the author of this article is now calling for an update. 2 days later, the doctors called them with an update. 2 days later, we got a phone call from the good doctors. They had sent the EVP recordings to an audio specialist. Oh, they're serious. Quote, "It's something interesting and needs further research," Dr. Stu said, adding that it would take some time for the audio results to come back. Like a proper man of science, he didn't want to confirm anything without conclusive evidence. That is very good for a paranormal investigator to do. Although I personally think he didn't really get much in that. He just needed a good ending for this article here. So if you want to read the article, observer.com, Fright at the Museum. And as you know, there is really no date to the articles that I'll read. This one dates all the way back to 2013, which makes me very surprised and happy that ghostdoctors.com is still a website that exists. They actually have a tour in Northern Virginia, which looks pretty cool. So shout out to the Ghost Doctors. But with saying that, it brings this week's podcast to an end. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to contact me with messages or whatever, Ghost Guy Daniel on Facebook, ggdaniel@ghostwalks.com. Thanks for listening, and have a very wonderful week.